Hey, this is Dusty. You might notice in this episode my audio is not quite up to the standard that it's been for the last couple. Messed up while recording and realized I was using the wrong microphone as the recording device, and I didn't notice until about 10 or 15 minutes into the recording, sorry about that. It does fix itself, so hope you don't mind too much.
Have you no hope at all? And do you really live with the thought that when you die and nothing remains?
The Sad Boys Book Club.
My mom died today.
Did you recently, sir?
Or yesterday, maybe. Standing on the beach with a book in my hand.
Magic 8 Ball Meursault says, I don't think so.
I'm alive, of course, but I'm also dead. I'm the stranger, doing a podcast. Hello. Thank you for joining me today here in beautiful Paris, the City of Lights, where we are taking in the sights of the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. We are smelling the delicate smell of the French patisserie. We are regaled by the cacophony of gunshots as John Wick fights like 100 guys over by the Arc de Triomphe. I, Daniel, and Dusty are here to take you on a journey of literature, a journey of absurdism, a journey through Albert Camus The Stranger. Now, as you sit here listening to this, wearing your beret, smoking your short cigarette, you must be thinking, what do these guys know about absurdism?
And to that I say, every day when I look in the mirror.
It's, yes, truly an absurd life. The life of a man. The life of mankind. The life of a murderer. All of these things and more to be discussed herein.
Welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. My name is Dusty.
And I'm Daniel.
And we're talking about The Stranger by Albert Camus. I've never read this book before.
Yeah, this is actually my first reread here in this this little series that we've done here. I first read this book, I want to say it was, and I don't know, I want to say somewhere like 8 to 10 years ago, I think, is when I read it. I actually didn't have to read it for a class. I was at the time, I was still a student, and I'd heard about, things like absurdist philosophy, things like existentialism, and I was kind of like, what is that? What are those things? So this was one of the things I was reading when I was kind of learning about those things.
Is this a book that does get assigned to literature readings? I imagine this might be a college thing. I can't imagine they would do it for high school.
I mean, well, we both went to the same high school, so I don't know. I mean, I think our curriculum was pretty good, but I don't know. Maybe in a more rigorous or maybe like arts oriented high school, you know how they have like magnet schools for like the arts and stuff, maybe something like that, but I think it probably would be a little bit of a lift for like the average high schooler, or maybe not, I don't know. I tend to feel your way. Like I was in college when I read it, so I think that was more or less the right time. If you're going to read it for the first time, that would be my first recommendation for, like, maybe that's when you're closest to ready for it.
I will say, though, our high school reading list, I don't think, especially in Texas at this point, I don't think you could get away with that anymore, because our reading list, we were to give the people some context, at least in senior year, depending on what teacher you had and whether or not you were in AP or not. So we'll just speak AP classes. Advanced placement, if you don't know. It's basically like pre-college classes. There were how our teachers did it was there were these different there were the books. There were like 4 or 5 or 6 books. I don't remember exactly how many there were, and each one had a certain number of slots in it, and you had to sign up for the book you wanted. And if you missed your chance at signing up for the book you wanted, well, too bad, you got to sign up for one of the remaining ones. And I was one of the people that was too bad you have to sign up for one of the remaining ones, because I think I wanted to do Catch 22. And so one of the remaining ones that I had to choose between, and I ended up choosing, was 1984, which ended up being the only book that was assigned to me in high school that I actually finished. Well, no, it was one of 2 that was assigned to me in high school that I actually finished. The other being The Things They Carried back in junior year, also one of my favorite books. That's a really, really good one. But I did 1984. I don't remember which one you did. I'm sure you do.
I know one book I did was The Sun Also Rises, which I enjoyed.
I don't remember if that was one of the ones from that one. The only ones I can remember, like I said, there were like 4, 5, or 6, but the only ones I remember were Catch 22, 1984, and Brave New World.
Did you and I think did one, right?
I don't remember.
I'm trying to remember. Because I didn't do 1984.
Then we didn't.
I know that.
Or
I know,
if we did,
and
it was one of the ones I didn't read.
I know there was like 2. We did it 2 years. There was like one time that we did in the fall semester and then once in the spring semester.
I don't remember. I only remember 1984 because, like I said, I didn't read anything else. Oddly enough, I would just stop reading it like the first day I started it, and it would end up being page 7 on every single book, just coincidentally enough. And then I would just go to Wikipedia and just read the plot synopsis and just go from there, or just Google the Spark Notes, because I don't know why I couldn't be bothered to read these books, despite the fact that they are good books. I don't know, I guess it was the you can't tell me what to do kind of teenager mindset I was in, maybe. I don't know, that could have been something else, but I never did.
And now look at you, you're hosting a literature podcast.
Yep, did not finish To Kill a Mockingbird when we were reading it for high school. Never finished it.
Well, maybe it was high school. I don't know. It's been a while. For some reason I wanted to say that was 8th grade, but it might have been high school.
It might have been 8th. It might have been 9th. I don't remember. Anyways, The Stranger. I don't know how I feel about this book so far as a part 1, to be honest. And I don't think it's bad, but I think it's weird.
I think it's definitely it could definitely be considered weird. I think it's especially because, this is not a genre that I personally have read like a good amount from. I don't want to speak for you necessarily. I don't know if you've read much of it either. It's the philosophical novel.
I don't think so. I'm pretty lame.
I would say regarding this book, it does tell a story, and it is a quality work of literature. So what my following statement is not meant to denigrate it, but rather to provide context. The story is not beside the point, but the story exists to serve as like I don't quite want to say parable, but it's meant to what?
A conduit?
A conduit, kind of. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it. It's basically meant as a conduit to sort of to show this idea, this philosophy of Camus, of like the idea of the absurd, of the absurdity of life, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Can I jump to the very end of part 1 real quick, just to say something?
Sure, why not?
Spoilers for the end of part 1. I have no idea why he shot the Arab man.
I don't think he knows fully why he murdered the Arab man. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, did it ever say his name? Because I remember it was only just kind of referred to as the Arab who was the brother to the girl that guy was abusing, and he was wearing blue coveralls.
No, and I think that's kind of... There's a couple different ways to look at it. I know a few years ago, a companion piece to this book was released, I believe by an Algerian author, called The Meursault Investigation, which told kind of the story of the murdered Arab man and like his life and his family. Because I think some people can look at the fact that he is just described as like the Arab. They could think that's kind of dehumanizing, and it could speak to a certain Eurocentric mindset of the author Camus. And I don't want to say that that's inherently wrong. I don't know. I'm not sure that I would fully categorize it the same way, because I think the character of Meursault just views everything. You see in a lot of the people that he talks to, like he doesn't really use their name except with a few exceptions, but they're like the director, the caretaker, the nurse. That's not to say that I don't think that it was a good and worthwhile thing. That especially if they found it was like a good artistic exercise to create that. But I do think that is something that is. I think that is a very fair perspective, and I think anybody that would be too harshly against that would probably be, I think they ought to consider that perspective, certainly.
Yeah. I don't also... So it's Meursault? That's how you say his name?
Yeah. I think it's something like that. That's probably better than the way I just been saying Meursault, but I think the way you pronounced it is probably closer to accurate.
Yeah, I know that there's some sort of like sound. I don't speak French. I've never learned French. So I'm probably the last person you want to ask on how to pronounce French words. But I know that there's going to be some vowel modulation going on in these words.
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's also kind of complicated, maybe slightly, but by the fact that this takes place and then during the French colonial occupation of Algeria, and that is another thing, and that's not to belabor the point there, but I think that is another point that somebody that would portray this novel as having a maybe detrimentally Eurocentric view towards some of the characters. I think that could be something that you could point to as something that colors Camus' perspective. Camus himself was a French Algerian man. I believe he was born in Algeria, but he was the French colonist extraction. But yeah, that's the thing, is like there's probably quite a few things that we are going to mispronounce. So I suppose apologies in advance.
Yeah, that's just kind of the nature of the beast. Honestly, we're not learned men, at least globally. That's fair. So I guess we'll go and if you're ready, we can go ahead and dive into chapter 1 here. Yeah. So this whole funeral chapter, because this first chapter is about his mom dying and him traveling to the countryside to bury her ostensibly. It's very weird, and for me, I guess I had you reading the prologue of Leviathan Wakes moment for this book in chapter 1, to where I was questioning if this was going to be a book for me.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, I don't think this book is bad. I think it's very weird because a lot of it, and I understand this is kind of stylistically the point, but it almost kind of feels like someone writing in their journal and them just kind of listing off, today I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I went here, and then I did this. And I understand it definitely does frame Meursault in a way that gives me an idea of his character, but I feel like the character that I get a glimpse of in Chapter 1 is a really bad representation of the kind of character he is. I feel like 2 through 6 do a better job than 1 does, and 1 kind of sets up this kind of negative connotation that does kind of get remedied later on, at least until he shoots the Arab man. But I don't know. I don't want to say I don't like Chapter 1, because I don't not like it, but it's a very weird, almost trance-like, hazy fog of a chapter.
I don't think that that's unintended. I think that's kind of how you're supposed to feel. I think that's supposed to encapsulate kind of Meursault's perspective in that moment, and I think it gives you a look into Meursault as the way he views the world. I think it's very. The first chapter is pretty important in understanding who he is as a character. It's the book starts out famously, "Maman died today, or yesterday maybe. I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Mother deceased. Funeral tomorrow. Faithfully yours." That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. So it kind of gives you like, there's like a little bit of confusion in there, right? You're talking about like, was it yesterday? Was it today? What does that mean? That kind of thing. And it gives you like a very sort of like, he has a very I don't want to say it's go ahead.
To me it feels apathetic.
I think that is intentional. That is certainly intentional, I would say. As we see during his he's kind of as he's going through things, that's kind of how he presents to, especially in his the way he interacts and the way he comments on things. We can kind of get into that as we go along, as we talk about the chapter. So as you mentioned, or as I mentioned, I suppose, the opening of the book is him finding out that his mother has passed away, and he's being summoned to go to the vigil, to go to the funeral, that to settle her affairs, as that kind of thing. She was a patient at a nursing home, at an old folks home, I suppose is what they called it at the time, in Marengo, which is a small town. But anyway, he goes to Marengo, and he's going on the bus, and like Dusty mentions, it is kind of drowsy and trance-like, because he's talking about the heat of the bus, the smell of the gasoline, and how he essentially passed out as soon as he got onto the bus.
Yeah, it gave me a sense that he was a narcoleptic person throughout the entire chapter, just for how often he was like, I got tired, and then I fell asleep.
I think that happens like 3 different times.
Yeah, one of them was just like in a chair, and I'm just like, man, are you okay?
I think that is that is kind of a thing. It's like he is very as we'll see through the book, he has a very sense-driven way of looking at the world. If that makes sense. Like his mother dies, and he's going through the funeral procession, and instead of thinking about his mother, thinking of like the memories, the things that had passed between him and his mother, he's not really thinking about those things. He's just like, man, it is really hot. As I'm, it's just those kind of things. Like his perspective is very oriented to his senses, and he seemingly has either no, I don't want to say no internal life, but he is like, I think his apathy, is very. The apathy creates this wall, and that's why I think it can come off sometimes as almost diary-esque, because it's like, I went here and did this, then I went there and did this, because there's not a lot of his commentary on events. He seems to mostly just accept things more or less at face value.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't want to say that it kind of makes him come across as, like, sociopathic, but it definitely makes him feel like somebody who just is not quite ticking correctly. Like, I think his screws are a little loose in some facet.
I think that is a fair interpretation of the character. I don't think he is supposed to be viewed necessarily as a hero or like someone that you need to emulate per se. Yeah. I think he just exists as kind of like a symbol, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does take some sociopathy to just walk up and shoot some dude. So
yeah, especially when he has ample opportunity to walk away, and frankly has no reason to shoot him just whatsoever. Like there is essentially no motive. He just kind of does it.
That's the thing that just really kind of is my sticking point is as to the why. It's just like you don't even, what was the dude's name? Was it Raymond?
Yeah, Raymond was his friend that he went to the beach with.
I feel like he didn't even like Raymond. He was just like, because Raymond's just like, I'm skipping ahead again. But Raymond's just like, hey, you want to be my friend? Like, we should be friends. You want to be my friend? And he's just like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. He doesn't feel anything towards him. So why does he just decide, I'm going to go shoot this dude that wants to, at the most, like, at the very least, beat up Raymond. At worst, kill Raymond. Which, I don't know. Once again, I'm jumping ahead. We can get more into this in a bit. But I don't know. Meursault just is... I don't know. He's such a weird character. And his lethargy throughout the first chapter, like I said, it kind of paints a bad tone for him.
Yeah. I think that's a fair interpretation. So he arrives at the old person's home, and he meets the director, and there's kind of a little bit of a back and forth where Meursault is kind of being assured by the director that he wasn't wrong to send his mother to the old person's home, and I feel like that is a pretty, like, a stock thing. I think a lot of people that are in those scenarios, there's a lot of, especially when the patient in question passes on, I'm sure there's a lot of feelings of what could I have done differently, and a lot of feelings of guilt. So I think the director is trying to assuage those feelings. But as we see through Meursault's perspective, Meursault himself doesn't seem to have any real feelings on the matter. He's just, he's like, after he's finished up, and he's talking about, he was telling her how much he enjoyed his life here, or her life at the old person's home. He says, the director spoke to me again, but I really wasn't listening anymore. Like he just...
a dick.
I think there's, I think that is a way that you could definitely perceive the character. I've been told that I think by I've seen people talk about this book, and people say that not that his actions are defensible per se, But I think that a lot of people say that if you're getting mad at Meursault, that is almost beside the point. But I think it's okay to have like a certain like dislike of Meursault. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But I think it's just what the whole point of that is if you just entirely shut yourself off to him as a person, you kind of can lose what the novel is trying to tell you. So I do kind of try to keep it that perspective, even though, broadly speaking, I would say I do not find Meursault to be a particularly sympathetic or likable character in and of himself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing it up a bit. He really isn't like this dastardly, diabolical, horrible human being, but he definitely does feel unsympathetic at the very least, at least at times. He definitely has some human emotions, but then he tends to just immediately kind of throw those away when somebody asks him how he's feeling.
Which kind of makes me wonder a little bit about Meursault. Like, what are the life experiences or brain formations that lead to Meursault as he is necessarily? I mean, I imagine someone would argue how any all those things are beside the point. And that the whole point of the novel is that life is in of itself absurd. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there is a certain when you see Meursault and you see I don't think that his way of life is particularly a fulfilling way to go through the world. I think that would be painful in its own way, I suppose I would say.
Yeah.
But anyway, the director, he's kind of trying to console Meursault, and then he asks if he wants to see his mother one last time, and so that he's taken over to the mortuary, and Meursault is looking, and he sees that the coffin has already pretty much been sealed, because it gets quite hot in Algeria, so I imagine those things that you have to move pretty quickly, just a biological reality, and so the caretaker comes in and he offers to open the casket, and essentially Meursault is like, "Nah, it's okay. Don't worry about it." And so from there, he's just kind of sitting there, and but he's kind of he's just standing in the room, and the caretaker doesn't leave. And so he says, "Having this presence breathing down my neck was starting to annoy me. The room was filled with a beautiful late afternoon sunlight. 2 hornets were buzzing against the glass roof. I could feel myself getting sleepy." So there we go. That's a soporific Meursault there. But that's kind of the thing, is he's just the guy is intending, I believe, to be to provide some sort of support, some sort of sympathy, and he's just kind of blowing him off. But they do talk a little bit, and then they're just kind of, we hear a little bit about the life of the caretaker, who basically, it's mostly the caretaker that is mostly doing the talking, and Meursault is just kind of sort of passively passing along what he has said, not without much reflection or commentary on that.
Yeah, he's just kind of he's not really a conversationalist.
No. Most of his things are like, yes, no, I'm not sure, that kind of thing. He's like he's like a magic 8-ball Meursault.
How are you feeling today, Meursault? Try again later. Or later on, when Marie asks do you want to marry me? Ask again later.
Then shake it. Yes. He's like, why not? At one point, so then the next they have the vigil, and he's in the vigil, and he's again dozing off as I'm flipping through the book, and I'm seeing these, the things. I'm seeing there's like a lot of dozing off and falling asleep and that kind of thing. And he kind of is looking at the mourners who are there to mourn his mother, and he doesn't really interact with them, but he does look at them, and he does think about them, and it's not exactly flattering. He's saying things like
Their
almost
eyes were
all the
super
women
beady.
were wearing, yeah. He's just saying like their eyes are beady, they're fat, or they're too skinny and they have canes. That kind of, they have toothless mouths. It's a very, instead of coming together, to celebrate the life of his mother, who obviously she had friends, and other people that cared about her, and these are people that he could, I'm sure, would be. Most people would find it helpful to sort of process these kind of emotions, but he does not really avail himself of that. He's just like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then he's like, we sat like that for just a while. The woman's sighs and sobs were quieting down. She sniffled a lot, then finally shut up. It just. I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but like that's just what we're supposed to be understanding. I think this is a good way to like categorize him as someone that is. Has a very harsh, and outlook on the world. Anyway, so they the next day they take him. They have the funeral procession, and it's pretty slow. As they're walking there, one of the Undertaker's assistants, I remember, asked Meursault how old his mother was, or if his mother was old, something like that, and. He doesn't really seem to know her age, so he's kind of like, I don't, so it's just kind of, it's another kind of interesting thing there. And as they're walking, he realized that this person that was following the funeral, a Mr. Perez, I think he had some sort of romantic relationship with his mother. And he just kind of observes him from a distance, as he's an older man and he's struggling to keep up with the procession, and he's kind of he's struggling, and it says big tears of frustration and exhaustion were streaming down his cheeks, but because of all his wrinkles, they really weren't dripping off. They spread out and ran together again, leaving a watery film over his ruined face. Then there was the church and the villagers on the sidewalk, the red geraniums on the graves in the cemetery. Perez fainting, he crumbled like a rag doll. The blood-red earth spilling over Maman's casket, the white flesh of the roots mixed in with it. More people, voices, the village, waiting in front of the cafe, the incessant drone of the motor, and my joy when the bus entered the nest of lights that was Algiers, and I knew I was going to sleep for 12 hours. Yeah. And so that's really his reflection. He not a lot about his mother, mostly about just like just pictures, snapshots of things that happened, often rendered in an unfavorable light. And basically just him, his view of the world being very sensate, very driven by his own perceptions, not so much by any kind of thought.
Yeah. And I do feel like another thing that's pretty telling is in the next chapter, he realizes that after he wakes up the next day, it's actually Saturday, so he has the weekend. And he's just like, nice, it's the weekend.
Yeah. And what does one do in the weekend when you've just buried your mother? Well, obviously, you go to the beach and you rekindle a relationship with a former that you had with a former coworker. So he goes down to the beach and he runs into Marie, and she's one of the few major characters, I would say. Like, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative sense. It's just like she is in the story, but it's unlike most characters who would just receive some sort of name that is descriptive of them in some way, the caretaker, the director, etc. She is Marie. So it's one of the easier characters to keep track of. Anyway, so she had worked with Meursault a while ago, and when he runs into her, he doesn't really describe how or why he how they happen to run into each other, but he just says that he did, and he kind of like helps her into a float, and they're kind of as they do that, it's sort of a sensual thing because they're brushing against each other, and they're in close proximity, and they're kind of like touching each other, and it's creating this very I guess charged vibe between the two of them. And again, he almost falls asleep. And so that they agree to see each other to further and to go to see a movie. She actually notices because he was wearing a black tie, I think, when they were going to their date, and she asked if he was mourning someone, and then he tells her that his mother had died, and when she wants to know when she had passed away, he's like, yesterday. And then let me see if I can find it. She gave a little start, but didn't say anything. I felt like telling her it wasn't my fault, but I stopped myself because I remembered I'd already said that to my boss. And that's another thing that we see with Meursault. It's he has a certain view of the world where he is. It does kind of remind me a little bit of like a young child per se. When they're earlier on in their like development of their like moral. And I guess it's not just children. There's a lot of people that never escape this phase. But his primary motivation seems to be avoiding blame for actions, because he's constantly driven by this urge to justify himself in that regard. So they go to the movie. It continues to have a very takes on a very a physical and sort of sensual aspect, and you'll notice very quickly as you read about Marie. I think that he has a very limited understanding of her as a person, and you can see this because there's not a lot of discussion about her as a person. Much like I said earlier, he barely even remembers. He just mentions, "Oh yeah, and I was at the beach and I saw Marie there." Like, there's not a lot of color to Marie except for the descriptions of her body and of how being with her either sexually or in a like a close physical proximity.
Yeah,
and so go ahead.
She kind of feels like an object.
I think that is intentional. I think we are supposed to understand that he is objectifying her. I think so that's basically it for there. He just kind of wanders around the rest of the chapter, just kind of like noticing things, but not things that I would regard of great consequence. It's just further solidification of who he is as a character.
Yeah, it's all very mundane, to say the least. We're kind of watching a play-by-play of this guy's life day after day.
Yeah, it's not a particularly remarkable recounting of events either. It's like literally just, you would not know, like if you just picked it up there, you would not know anything like significant had happened in this guy's life, maybe ever.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, on Sunday after she leaves that next morning after staying the night with him, he spends the entire day just sitting at and staring out the window or something like that.
That's pretty much it. He just stares out the window and notices things and people and like that kind of stuff.
That's just
then he
so
like goes
weird.
to a restaurant or something.
No, he decides not to go to the restaurant, or I might be mixing up another thing. No, I think.
Oh, you're right.
I think he might go down and buy like for dinner. He buys stuff to make like spaghetti or something. But like for all intents and purposes, he's just staring at the window, sitting in his chair. He's straddling his chair, and just watching people come and go until it's nighttime. And he's like, "Well, time for bed." What a boring day.
I think that is intentional. I believe that is to sort of give a look at the world. It's like, yes, his mother did pass away, but you know, it's his detached nature sort of gives him, instead of like really ruminating on that and the meaning of her life and their relationship and all those kind of things, life is just basically carrying on for him. It's like he sees the world like in a macro sense. You know, he is like, you know, life goes on, you know, that kind of thing, which is obviously a cruel and cold thing that someone would do in the microcosm, like in his case. But it is there is a certain veracity in the fact that, you know, obviously every day is the worst day of somebody's life, and yet, you know, generally speaking, the world continues to carry on around them. You know, I think that's what we're supposed to take from all that, and he's just like speaking from that vantage point, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like there's not a huge amount that's worth delving into as he talks about his kind of day-to-day work life. I think the more important things to take away from the next couple bits are his interactions with his neighbors.
Yes.
So there's, oh God, what's his name? The guy with the dog.
Salamano.
Yeah, Salamano. This dude sucks. This dude straight up sucks.
Oh yeah, he's terrible. Salamano is this old reprobate that lives next to Meursault. His primary thing that you know about him is his relationship to his dog, who is this poor little thing that's suffering from mange, you know, and is just like clearly not, you know, clearly going through a lot of suffering just from it's his physical standpoint, but also because this hideous old man is basically, as he walks the dog, he's always like, he's constantly beating it and yelling at it. So it's just this dog is living a very miserable life, and I just want to hold that in your thoughts just for a second, because I'd like to make a comparison with him and his other neighbor, Raymond Sentes is apparently his name. I don't know where that is. Maybe that's described later, but his name is Raymond.
Raymond also sucks.
Yeah, he's pretty terrible. He's described as he describes himself as a warehouse guard, but the neighbors describe him as, quote, living off of women. I'm not quite sure I understand the full veracity of what that necessarily means. The way I took it was he was one of those kind of guys that, you know, they get into a relationship with a woman and is always constantly asking like them to they come on strong. They're very like emotionally manipulative to make them feel these women feel loved and valued and part of their life, and then from there like extract money from them. Like they're asking them, to loan him money constantly. I don't know if that's necessarily what was meant, but that was kind of my perception, and it was kind of borne out by the fact that he is, as we will see, a fairly manipulative person.
Yeah, which he certainly is that, at least to the extent of him being manipulative. But it seems like it's more kind of the other way in that because he talks about the woman that he's dating, the woman whose brother is the aforementioned Arab man, and he's talking about how he pays her rent, which is like 300 francs, and then he gives her 20 francs a day. But then he'll also occasionally buy her stuff on the side, so he ends up spending like 1,000 francs on her a month rather. And I mean, I'm more inclined to believe the warehouse guard thing, because you can't just kind of hand out. I don't know how much 1,000 francs is, especially comparatively in that time at that time period. But I feel like you can't just kind of hand out that kind of money without having some form of income. So
I think there's something, I don't know. There may be something that we're missing, but the living off of women is a comment that is made that kind of sticks in my mind. So I think that however that is actually meant, maybe that has something to do with what he's part of how he derives his income.
Yeah.
Anyway, he essentially he runs into Meursault, and he's asking him for some, he wants to talk to him, and he's asking Meursault whether he wants to be, I believe the word he uses is pals, and Meursault is just like, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, whatever, and he, in his Meursault way, and Raymond essentially gives Meursault this account of him suspecting that the woman that he's seeing, his girlfriend, was cheating on him, so he beat her, and at that point she chose to leave him. At some point later, when Raymond was riding a bus, he gets into an altercation. I guess he sees a guy on the street who's yelling at him, and this is the Arab man, and so he gets into a fight with him, and then he beats him up in the street, and then they kind of go their separate ways.
That was the Arab man?
I think so. That was her brother. Her brother, I believe, was also an Arab.
I didn't remember him being even introduced until after the incident with the police, but I could be remembering wrong. It does kind of blend together a bit.
Yeah, and for context, also, she is also an Arab woman. They mentioned.
Yeah, they said she's Moorish.
Yeah, so he wants to create he wants to write a letter to sort of he's trying to dentist system her almost. He's trying to write her a letter to sort of like make her feel guilty because he believes that he cheated or she cheated on him. He wants to manipulate her into to coming back to him, and then he plans on beating her again after performing some sort of sexual humiliation, and this is yet another reason why Meursault does not strike quite a sympathetic figure to me. Meursault, without really much reflection, is like, okay, yeah, sure, he goes along with it, and he helps him concoct this letter. And so, he says that, after he looks at the letter, he's like, okay, now we're pals. And Meursault, as ever, is like, I don't care one way or the other. I don't mind that we are friends, essentially.
Yeah.
And as the chapter ends, he hears the sound of the poor dog, Salamano's dog, crying. So I think that's this is like this chapter, this first, well, not first chapter, I guess this is chapter 3, is it's a little bit about abuse. It's about abusers. We see the behavior of Solomano. He's this tyrant. He's this little, this little old man who doesn't have a lot going for his life. He is in great suffering too, as they allege. They say he doesn't have mange per se, but he does have some sort of skin condition as well, and so he's probably living in a very marginal life, and he's taking out his anger and frustrations, and he terrorizes this poor dog. That I think that is also contrasted with Raymond, who is he's abusive to his romantic partner, this woman, and probably other partners before her, and so that it's just, I think this is kind of like setting up this. It's kind of a rumination about the kind of people that are abusers.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the things that just doesn't sit well with me is how much of it is kind of played off as either something to laugh at or something to just kind of be like, well, that's just how things are. I don't really, like, people aren't really shocked, or even they don't even care. It's like, yeah, this dude beats his dog. That's their dynamic. That's just how they are. And it's like, no, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And we do get some form of societal kickback when Raymond's plan kind of comes to action, where the letter that Meursault wrote for him, for the girl, and I guess his the punishment she deserves plan goes off without a hitch as he sees it, and Marie and Meursault hear her just getting the shit beat out of her. And the thing that kind of strikes me is just another tick on the damnation of Meursault is she's like, oh my god, you should call the cops, this is not okay. And his response is, I don't like cops. And that's it. That's the end of it. And it's like, I can understand having some misgivings and mistrust towards law enforcement because, there's a lot of cases where that's very warranted. But in a situation like this, I don't know why you think it's better. I think your
primary responsibility is to make it stop.
Yeah. And
irrespective of your feelings.
Yeah, and I feel like the best way to do that is to have a person of at least some sort of perceived authority to handle it, which the cops do eventually, or a cop eventually comes, and I found it a little gratifying that he slapped Raymond around a little bit and was like, you don't talk to police this way, but that ends up going nowhere because good old Saint Meursault comes in as a character witness for Raymond and is like, yeah, but she was cheating on him. And I guess that makes everything okay, because if a woman cheats on a man, which granted is morally wrong, but does not mean she should have the shit beat out of her. But I guess in this story, and with this kind of body of people, no, that's totally fine. Oh, she got what she deserved, so we're not gonna be. She cheated on him. I'll release him. He's an upstanding man who just had to protect his pride. It's so messed up. The kind of the morality of this world, and it's our world. Let's not pretend that this is some sort of fictional universe. This is supposed to be some sort of mirror of reality. It's so messed up, and it's such a, I don't want to say disgusting thing to read, but it's a very like unsettling.
It is ugly in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
it is very ugly.
The fact that this woman could be treated this way, and Raymond gets off scot-free because some dude that lives downstairs from him says, yeah, she's a cheater, is that's not okay. But I guess that's just how things were, because I mean, let's be honest here, history is pretty misogynistic.
I agree. This context that I'm going to be providing here is not in any way to condone, what's happened, but just to give you kind of a look at, part of like why they're able to rationalize as they do. This book was written during the Nazi collaboration government of the Vichy France, which obviously adds an extra layer of like like a very disgusting society, and any kind of Nazi or Nazi aligned system is going to be thoroughly not just misogynistic, but just fully just hideous and repellent. But even prior to the assumption of power by these Nazi aligned elements in France, this we have to reckon with that. This is a colonial power, France. The woman is an Arab. The man is a white Frenchman. So, she is those kind of people, are ripe for abuse, because the system, particularly as it regards women, but particularly of these subjugated people, they are dehumanized, and so therefore it is a lot easier for an abuser to get away with their predations on these women, and also kind of not to draw a false equivalency per se, but it's similar to the dog. The dog is just a dog as people look at it. It's obviously this dog is going through great suffering, but people are able to, and obviously this man Salamano is extremely cruel to this dog, and but people are just able to rationalize it because of their worldview. It's like that's just how it is, just like somebody is that's just kind of my take on that. Fortunately, I would say for the dog does manage to get away during a walk. This is one of the few good things that happen, I would say, so far in the novel, is that the dog manages to escape from his abusive owner. I hope it lives a better life moving forward, but I don't know. People didn't have particularly enlightened views of animals at the time, as we mentioned. So I guess we'll see. But the old man, he has like this this breakdown. He's kind of like he tries to appear distraught, and maybe part of him is distraught at the idea of losing the dog. And he's talking to Meursault, and he's like, what's going to happen to the dog? And Meursault's like, well, probably, he's either around here or he's probably in the pound. And he's asking about how we could get the dog from the pound, and like what the policies of the pound and that kind of thing. And he's all distraught and seemingly torn up about it emotionally. But I do not necessarily view that as sincere, per se. I think the reason he is torn up about it is because without the dog, there is now nothing that he really controls anymore. The dog was basically the one thing he could control and abuse. Without the dog now gone, he is now just this fully disempowered, pathetic old man. That kind of thing. And so I guess that's where does that get us? I think that's the first 4 chapters, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the only thing we really have left to cover is the beach, the beach house with what's his name, Masson.
Yeah. Last little quick thing that. Okay, so essentially, just quick notes before we go to the beach. Meursault is kind of he's asked, or as essentially two things are offered to him. He's offered promotion, which he, in his typical Meursault way, is like, I don't care, and so his boss gets kind of mad at him for that, which is neither necessarily here nor there, but it does kind of show, another incident of him just not having any kind of real internal drive or any kind of, I don't know. It's just another incident of showing his sort of apathy. Because I think that would be a great with the promotion. He would be given an opportunity to move to Paris, which maybe that's not for everyone, but I would think it would be a nice thing, particularly for a lot of people that have to live in a very I don't know. I would have considered it. I think a lot of people in Meursault's position would have considered it a very good thing, a chance to have a new start, after the loss of his mother, the chance to live in an exciting, one of the world important cities in the world. I think a lot of people would have been excited about that, and I think the boss was a little bit offended by how blasé Meursault was about that. But more importantly, Marie asks Meursault to marry him. And he agrees because old Magic 8 Ball Meursault, it was just like, yeah, okay. He doesn't really he agrees to marry her, but what's interesting to me about her, and this is something that I kind of wish I could have a little bit more context for, because Meursault does not see fit to categorize Marie beyond how he engages with her physically for the most part. I don't understand fully what she finds so interesting about Meursault, and it leads me to believe that perhaps there is something that is maybe broken in her as well. She's attracted to this man that is entirely withholding, I would say, from an emotional perspective. So she asks him if he loves her. He's like, I don't think that I do. I don't think it's kind of meaningless. So I probably don't. But she decides she wants to marry him anyway. So, I guess, guys, there really is someone for everybody.
I guess so.
Let's see. And then Salamano, this last thing that I found kind of interesting. Salamano, as he's going home, this is the day before they go to the beach. Salamano says that he tries to give like this categorization, or talks about his relationship with the dog and all of that, what the dog meant to him, and how he bought it after his wife passed away, and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of it is, to me, as with the incident of seeing Raymond kind of getting slapped around and he's a big tough guy when it comes to beating up his ex, but when it comes to when he's confronted by someone with power, he becomes this sort of meek person. And I think that we see Salamano here in a similar light, where he's like, I really did love that dog, and blah blah blah, and I bought it because because my wife had passed away, and it's a lot of self-justification. And what really set me down that road is because he mentions to Meursault, he's like, hey, I know everybody in the the neighborhood said bad things about you for sending your mother to the nursing home, but I know you really did love her, you know. And it's just kind of like, I feel like that is kind of a cope. You know, he's like, because I think he knows how he was perceived in the neighborhood. As I mean, while nobody did anything about it, because, you know, c'est la vie, to use their term, you know, I think he was aware that people looked down on him for, you know, dragging that poor dog all over the road and beating it and screaming at it. I think it's his way. And this is something that I think that happens in the book at various times, is like this idea of people projecting, especially because Meursault is such a blank slate, their feelings, their perceptions, their guilt on him, you know?
Yeah. Which I don't think anybody should be necessarily criticized for feeling that they need to put a parent in a nursing home, which his justification for it was she seemed to be pretty bored, and he just could not financially keep up with the two of them, and that's understandable, to be honest. I don't think he should be faulted for that.
I tend to agree, and also there's just a level of care that they can, you know, at least potentially receive, because they're, you know, trained medical professionals, and you're just, you know, one person often without training, just kind of doing your best. But that's not. I don't necessarily mean to impute a moral judgment on Meursault. I just mean it in. I'm sure, especially at the time when such a thing was probably a pretty new concept, a lot of people probably looked down on it, and so I think that the Solomonos thing there was not. Yeah, I don't believe that necessarily Camus is supposed to, or is wanting us to take away Meursault is bad because he put his mother in the nursing home. I don't think that is. I think if it is one of the lesser of the crimes of Meursault.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
And so finally, this is the last little bit here, the beach incident.
So Raymond invited Meursault and Marie to his friend Meursault, who has a beach house out on the beach. And since Marie and Meursault are just avid beachgoers, it's like, yeah, sure, okay, whatever. Dude's got like a nice little summer home that him and his wife stay in basically every day he's not working, and they have more fun on the beach and all this other stuff. Well, it is important to say that Raymond does tell Meursault that there are a group of Arab men following him, and one of them is his girlfriend's brother, and when they go catch the bus to head to the beach, they are standing outside their apartment building staring in their direction. So that's kind of a prelude of the disaster, so to say. So they're having their fun on the beach, and the three men decide to take a walk, and there they run into the three Arab men. Or sorry, no, they run into two Arab men rather, and the plan is Raymond's going to take one, Meursault's going to take the other, and Meursault is going to hang back, and if a third one pops up, that's his man. So they fight. The brother pulls out a knife, slashes open Raymond's arm and mouth, and then they retreat. So he has to get medical attention. They head back. The women are all shaken up about it because, oh man, this was a big deal. Raymond comes back. He's all irritated, so he decides to go on a walk. He doesn't want anyone to come with him, but Meursault does anyways. And then they find the two Arab men once again, and Raymond has a gun on him, and Meursault is trying to tell him, don't shoot him unless you have an actual reason to. Don't just shoot him in cold blood, because you can't really defend that.
Which is crazy, because that is the only time Meursault offers anything even approaching some sort of moral judgment on anything.
Yeah, and he ends up getting the gun from Raymond, and they just leave, right?
Yeah, essentially they get the gun, and then the fight kind of. I'm trying to remember.
They leave, I think, the two Arab men.
They
see the gun and they
essentially
leave.
just. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so they go back, and for some reason, the idea of facing the women is just too much for Meursault, but also the blaring heat is too much for him, so he kind of puts himself in this kind of rock in a hard place situation, so he just suddenly finds himself wandering. He wanders back to the spot where they found the two Arab men, and the brother is there by himself, and they notice each other, and Meursault still has the gun on him, and he approaches him. The dude pulls out the knife, because he's like, hey, what are you doing? And essentially, I'm going to call it heat hysteria takes over Meursault, and he shoots him like 5 times. And that is the end of part 1.
Yeah. So that is it's a very especially for the first time you read it. It's a very shocking conclusion to part 1, because obviously we see Meursault as this very I guess a good way to put it would be an amoral kind of guy, but it's like largely things have gone in a very mundane, things that I think he's lived a very mundane sort of existence. So this kind of like catapults the narrative, and I think my memories of the second half, and we'll see in subsequent week. What happens, putting this strange and apathetic person, into this the nexus of all these questions of why he did it, of the criminal justice system, of the nature of life and death, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I really am, like I said before, I really am just kind of left scratching my head at this. Like, I hope that we get at least some depth of the mind of Meursault by the end of this, because I can't put together what exactly caused him to just suddenly decide, yeah, I'm gonna shoot this dude, when he had no real reason to in the first place. I almost wonder if it's, they call it, I know a common term for it is the stare into the void, where you think of something, it's almost like your brain testing you, like testing your morals or where you stand, where you will like for example, you'll be driving and you just have the thought, I could swerve into the other lane right now, something like that.
Mm-hmm. The call of the void.
The call of the void. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. The call of the void. I'm almost wondering if it's a situation to where Meursault had the call into the void and he answered it.
It's. I think that is kind of a fair thing. It's just, even before to stay. He's talking about. Okay, here we go. The sun glinted off of Raymond's gun as he handed. That's a little earlier. But okay, here's the what I find to be a crucial line. It was then that I realized you could either shoot or not shoot. I think that's kind of that is very indicative of Meursault's thinking. In this time, it's like, there's not a lot of judgment or weight. It's like essentially, he just views them as essentially equivalent. It's not like another person might say to kill a man or to murder a man or not, but he's like, shoot or not shoot. He cuts it down. He removes it from a moral framework and puts it into a very I I don't know how to put it fully. It's just like is just a very mechanical like A or B, you know?
Yeah, he's a very binary thinker.
To stay or go, it amounted to the same thing. You know, I think that's another very it's very relevant to his thinking at the time, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, like I feel like he's a very binary thinker. Like everything has to boil down to we should get married or we should not get married. I should go and bury my mother or I should not. And it's all of these things, it's like he just kind of like I think mechanical, like you said, is a very good way of putting it. He's a very I do think sociopath is maybe the best way to describe him.
Yeah, it's I think that'd be interesting. I don't know that there can be a fully answer that will fully satisfy or can fully satisfy like why he did this, because I think that is part of the thesis, I would say, of the novel, is that the sort of absurdity and cruelty of life and the banality of you know the things that happen to us, you know, and the things we do, you know, it's like it is all so much dust in the wind. It's just another drop in the ocean, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a very, very kind of universal outlook on life itself.
Mm-hmm.
We are but ants to the grand scale of the universe as a whole.
I think that is kind of, at least, if Meursault wouldn't put it in those terms, because I don't think he's given like too deep thought, you know. But I think that's kind of how he views it. Is like, whatever I choose, it amounts to the same, absolutely nothing. To quote The Cure's song, the musical adaptation of this book.
Oh, interesting.
Which it's actually quite a good song. It was a little bit considered that the title it was given was a little bit considered pretty controversial. It was called "Killing an Arab," and that was led to a lot of controversy. Not again, much like how I felt about, you know, the colonial aspect, you know, and the post-colonial reinterpretations of this. Not necessarily wrong, but you know, I think there's a very there's something to be said, certainly, for how they feel about it. So it's actually, they still perform it, but they haven't released it on any of their re-releases of their albums. But these days they perform it as "Killing Another." They, instead of singing "Killing an Arab," they say "Killing Another."
Yeah, that's. I feel like that's in a situation where you gotta understand that context is important. Because I don't think there's knowing the basis of where that comes from. That title isn't as controversial as it should be. At least I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where the critique is. I and especially, you know, as time has gone on, I can understand the critique, but I would say that I do not feel that there was any negative feeling or intent on the part of the Cure. But anyway, it's a pretty good song. You know, it's actually speaking for me, because I was a young guy, you know, teenager, early 20s guy, you know, getting into the Cure, and I heard the song, and I was starting to also get into like the idea of like, you know, absurdism and philosophy in general and existentialism. So that was actually the initial push for me to read this novel the first time, was hearing that song. I was like, oh yeah, the novel, The Stranger. I need to read it someday. And now here I am, 8 to 10 years on, sometime in the future, discussing it on a podcast.
Yeah, that's That's the weird way that life goes.
The turns of fate.
Yep.
But anyway, I would like to thank everybody for listening to part 1 of The Stranger. I look forward to seeing you all for part 2.
Yep. This will be a 2-parter. We are halfway through the book. This is a very short book. Would you say it's more of a novella, or would you say that it does hit the novel minimum?
I think it's pretty close, but I mean, I wouldn't bite your head off for calling it one or the other. I would lean more towards novella, but like I said, I think it's pretty close.
Yeah.
But I think it's not a bad. It's pretty short, so we've been reading some pretty lengthy books, so it's good. Good pace breaker.
It's definitely going to bring down our average.
Or bring up, in terms of the average number of books completed.
That too, yes. But yeah, my copy, which I got from my local library. Support your local libraries, everybody. They're awesome. Mine it's 123 pages, so it's real short.
Yeah, mine is. We have the same translation, so mine is pretty much the same number of pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, it ends on 123.
But I'm curious to see how this goes. As I said, I don't know how I feel about this book yet. I definitely think I need the context of part 2 before I can definitively go one way or the other on it. As it stands right now, it's a book that I think that it's good that I've read so far, but it's not one that I think I would go as far as to say I would love, let alone like.
That's fair. I think as long as you take something from it, I think that's what's important.
Yeah, and that doesn't
Now,
mean
what
that
you take from it is subjective and depends on you, but I think that's probably, and I feel like Camus would feel similarly, that is more important than any sort of direct enjoyment or non-enjoyment thereof.
Yeah, and I do think that its length does give it some more favorability in that regard, because it is a relatively short novel, and even if you don't get much out of it, or that you don't really enjoy it too much, if you really sit down and it's a half an afternoon read. It really is like a 2-3 hour read if you really just sit down and bust it out. So you're not really losing a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that'll get us for today. Thank you everybody for joining us, and look forward to catching part 2 next time.
Yep. See you next time.